You're walking home, driving with the radio off, standing in your kitchen staring at nothing for a second longer than normal. And it hits you, not as fear but as clarity. No one is tracking your life the way you are. No one is going to call and say, "I see what you could become. I'm ready now. Let's build it together." Not because people are cruel, because they're busy being the main character in their own story. Most men don't admit how much they wait for a green light. They call it timing. They call it planning. They call it getting ready. But underneath it is a quieter hope. Someone will make this easier. A friend will join. A mentor will appear. A partner will take the weight. A team will form around the idea once it's explained the right way. And when that doesn't happen, they don't just feel disappointed. They feel personally rejected by life. So they stall. They shrink the goal. They lower the standard. They keep their ambition small enough that it doesn't require bravery. Here's the part that matters. If you need support to begin, you don't have support, you have a condition. And conditions are fragile. They can vanish in a week. Someone gets busy, someone loses interest. Someone doubts you, someone resents your progress. That's why this moment, this quiet realization, is the dividing line. For most people, it becomes a reason to slow down. For a small number, it becomes something else. Relief. Because the moment you stop expecting rescue, you stop negotiating with ghosts. You stop scanning the horizon for permission. You finally face the only person who can move this forward. You. And that's not a motivational line. It's an operational truth. In the next few minutes, I'll show you how to build from that truth, without bitterness, without theatrics, using the psychology most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. People don't support potential. They support proof. So if you're waiting for support, you're waiting for the wrong signal. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner your life stops being delayed by other people's moods. We're trained early to confuse progress with permission. In school, the default is the group. You learn to wait until everyone agrees. You learn that momentum is something you feel when the room is with you. Then you enter adult life and the pattern just changes outfits. At work, it becomes meetings, alignment, stakeholder buy-in, a calendar full of people whose job is to decide whether your idea is ready. Even outside work, it's the same structure. You float a goal to friends to see if it gets applause. You bring an ambition to family, hoping it becomes real once someone says, "That's a great idea." And if it doesn't get that reaction, you interpret it as information. You tell yourself, maybe it's not the right time. Or maybe I should wait until I have more support. But look at what's happening psychologically. You're using other people's emotional response as your ignition. You're renting motivation. And anything you rent can be taken back. This is the part that sounds harsh, but it's just accurate. Support is not a neutral gift. Support creates a relationship of influence. Even well-meaning people shape you without noticing. They encourage what feels safe. They reward what looks normal. They question what makes them uncomfortable. So you start editing yourself, not consciously, quietly. You remove the sharp edge of the goal. You soften the timeline. You make it sound more reasonable so the room stays calm. That's the trap. Because the version of your life that gets universal approval is almost never the version that changes anything. Approval is optimized for comfort, not for achievement. This is why so many men stay stuck in preparation. They don't lack intelligence. They don't lack work ethic. They lack a private standard that doesn't require applause. And here's the dark psychology underneath it. Most people will not support you until your success becomes socially safe for them to associate with. Before results, supporting you is a risk. After results, supporting you is a social asset. It's not evil. It's human. But if you don't understand that, you'll keep mistaking silence for a sign to stop. Silence isn't a verdict, it's the baseline. And if you can operate from baseline, if you can work without external warmth, you become unusually difficult to derail. Most people talk about support like it's pure, as if help arrives without a price tag. But in real life, support has terms, spoken or unspoken. Sometimes the terms are obvious. Money comes with ownership. Connections come with obligations. A favor comes with an expectation that you'll repay it later in a form you don't control. Other times, the terms are psychological. Someone believes in you. until you start changing faster than they're comfortable with. Someone encourages you until your discipline makes them feel exposed. Someone cheers for you until your progress quietly rearranges the hierarchy. And then the support becomes conditional, not because they're villains, because people protect their identity. If your growth threatens the story they tell themselves about their own choices, they'll resist it. They'll do it politely with concern. They'll say things like, "Just don't burn out. Be realistic. Maybe slow down a bit. Why are you so intense lately?" It sounds caring, but it's often a soft attempt to pull you back to a pace that keeps everyone comfortable. This is where the darker part of psychology matters. Support can become a leash even when it feels like love, because the moment you depend on their approval, they own a button on your nervous system. When they're warm, you move. When they're cold, you hesitate. When they doubt you, you start explaining yourself. That explaining seems harmless, but it's the beginning of surrender. You're not clarifying your vision for them. You're asking permission to keep it. And if you do that long enough, your ambition becomes a committee project. You start making decisions based on how they will react. You stop doing what is effective. You start doing what is acceptable. So the question isn't, is support good or bad? The question is simpler. Can you still execute if the support disappears? Because it will. People get busy. Relationships shift. Energy changes. If your system collapses the moment the encouragement fades, you never had a system. You had a mood. And here's the uncomfortable advantage of having zero support. When no one is invested in your outcome, no one gets a vote. No one can withdraw funding, attention, or enthusiasm and pull your steering wheel with it. You don't have to manage anyone else's expectations. You only have to manage your standard. That's the first real taste of freedom, not the romantic kind, the operational kind. When you don't have support, there's a temptation that looks responsible. You start trying to earn belief before you earn results. You polish the pitch, you rehearse the explanation. You build the perfect plan in your head so no one can criticize it. Because criticism hurts more when you're alone. When there's no team behind you, a single raised eyebrow can feel like a verdict, so you compensate by over-explaining. You bring people a blueprint when what they trust is concrete. And that's the trap. The more you talk about the future, the more your mind feels like it has progressed. It gets a small reward, relief, validation, even just the comfort of being heard. But nothing has been built, so you talk again. You tweak again. You wait for the moment when the idea finally feels approved. This is how men get stuck in a loop that can last years. Explaining instead of executing, planning instead of producing, asking the room instead of asking the work. Here's a blunt truth. Without drama, people cannot support what they cannot see. Not because they're shallow, because they're human. Potential is invisible, effort is invisible, intentions are invisible, proof isn't. So if you're waiting for support, what you're really waiting for is proof. But you can't have proof before you start, which means you've built a contradiction into your life. I will move when the world confirms me, but the world only confirms what moves. That contradiction creates a specific kind of fatigue, not physical, existential. You feel like you're carrying a life inside you that isn't allowed to be born. And the longer you sit in that, the more your mind starts bargaining. Maybe it's not for me. Maybe I missed my window. Maybe I should do something smaller. And those thoughts feel like wisdom. They're not wisdom. They're the brain trying to end discomfort. Because building without support forces you to sit in uncertainty without applause. That's why most people don't do it. Not because they can't, because they don't want to feel that silence. But if you can survive that silence without turning it into a performance, you unlock something rare. You stop needing permission. You stop asking the room, you start asking a better question. What can I finish this week that proves I'm real? Not a speech, not a post, not an announcement, a finished piece of work. That's the pivot. And once you make it, the psychology changes fast. Because you're no longer chasing belief, you're manufacturing evidence. There's a strange upgrade that happens when you stop performing your life. When you have no support, you naturally want to prove yourself. You want someone to witness the effort. Because if no one sees it, it can feel unreal. So you talk, you post, you hint, You build a small audience around your future self, but the audience changes the work. The moment there are eyes on you, you start managing perception. You start choosing actions that look impressive instead of actions that are effective. You start timing progress for visibility. This is where quiet becomes an advantage, not silence as a vibe, silence as a strategy. When nobody is watching, you're free to be bad at first, free to make ugly drafts, free to repeat the same boring practice until it becomes skill, free to build competence without the pressure of identity. That is the quiet engine. Because real progress doesn't come from intensity. It comes from repetition without negotiation. And the easiest way to ruin repetition is to turn it into a performance. When you build privately, you stop leaking energy through explanation. You stop releasing pressure through conversation. The pressure stays inside the system. It becomes friction. It becomes focus. This is why some people seem to disappear for a while and come back different. Not louder, not flashy, sharper. Their confidence isn't a mood, it's structural. It's built on the fact that they know quietly what they can do. And this is where a little dark psychology helps. Because it's simply true, most people are addicted to being seen. They don't want success, they want visibility. Visibility gives them a quick hit of value without the long work of becoming valuable. If you can step out of that addiction, you separate from the herd immediately. You begin to operate like someone who is building a foundation, not a highlight reel. So if you have zero support, don't try to fix it by collecting spectators. Use it. Let the room stay empty. Let the work be private long enough to become undeniable. Because once your competence is real, you won't need people to believe in you. Belief becomes irrelevant. If you build without support, there's a phase nobody romanticizes. It's not the hustle. It's not the locked-in moments. It's the valley, the part where you're doing the work, and nothing is happening yet. No messages, no recognition, no proof that you're not wasting your time. That's when the mind turns on you, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, clinical way. It starts presenting questions that sound reasonable. What if this is just ego? What if they were right to doubt me? What if I'm not built for this? How long am I going to do this alone? And because you're alone, there's no external reality check, no one to interrupt the spiral, no one to say, keep going. So the brain tries something else. It offers a deal, a very old deal. It says, go back to the tribe and I'll make the discomfort stop. This is where people misinterpret loneliness. They treat it as evidence that something is wrong. But loneliness is often just the nervous system reacting to lack of social proof. Humans evolved to treat exclusion as danger, not because it's morally painful, because historically exclusion meant vulnerability. So your body reacts as if you're doing something risky. Because you are, you're stepping outside the comfort economy, and the brain hates that. Here's the key. You don't have to beat these thoughts. You just have to recognize what they are. Not truth, not insight, a safety mechanism. A negotiation tactic. Your mind is trying to pull you back to the shortest path to relief, comfort, distraction, belonging. And if you don't understand this, you'll start doing the worst thing possible in the valley. You'll start reaching out for support as a sedative, not for strategy, not for partnership, for comfort. You'll message people you don't even respect. You'll go back to old environments. You'll accept noise just to stop feeling the silence. That's not connection. That's anesthesia. The mature move in the valley is different. You let the discomfort exist without making it a story. You don't label yourself broken. You don't label yourself special. You simply say, this is the cost of building something real without witnesses. And you keep your day clean, not heroic, clean, because valleys don't last forever, but the men who panic inside them tend to stay there. Here's what changes when you stop waiting for backup. At first, it feels like you've lost something, like you're missing a tool everyone else has. Then slowly you realize something uncomfortable. A lot of people don't have support either. They just have noise. They have group chats full of sympathy, friends who validate the excuse, mentors who give them a clean story to tell themselves about why they're not ready yet. It feels like support, but it keeps them soft. Because when there are always cushions around you, you never learn how hard the ground is. and you never build the reflex to stand up fast. When you're unsupported, the feedback is immediate. If you don't work, nothing moves. If you don't learn, you stay stuck. If you avoid the hard task waits for you every day until you either handle it or fold. This is where real competence is born, not from inspiration, from necessity. You stop looking for motivation and start looking for leverage. What skill would make this easier? What system would make this repeatable? What problem, if solved, would remove friction from everything else? And because there's no one to rescue you, you actually answer those questions. You become practical. You become fast. You make decisions without needing a committee to approve them. You don't need consensus to move forward. You don't need a social mood to start. You build a kind of internal authority most people never develop. And that internal authority shows up externally. Your work gets cleaner. Your communication gets shorter. You stop over-explaining. You stop asking for reassurance. Even your presence changes. Because a person who can carry his own weight without constant reinforcement doesn't need to advertise confidence. He doesn't need to convince anyone. He's too busy finishing. And that is the real advantage of zero support. It forces you to become the asset, not your network, not your team, not someone else's belief. You. It's predictable, not because people are evil, because people are social. When you're building and nothing is visible yet, your ambition feels like a risk to stand next to. If they support you too early and you fail, it makes them look foolish. So they stay neutral. They keep distance. They wait and see. But when the results become obvious, when the work has shape, something changes. The tone changes. Suddenly you get the message, the casual check-in, the friendly, "I've been meaning to call you." Sometimes it's family, sometimes it's old friends, sometimes it's people who ignored you for years. And they'll do something subtle. They'll try to rewrite the timeline. They'll talk as if they were always close to the story, as if they always believed, as if the silence was a misunderstanding. This is where most men get pulled back into the old contract. The old version of you, the one who wanted support, wants to accept it, wants to feel the warmth, wants to finally be seen. But you have to be careful, not angry, not dramatic, just careful. Because attention isn't the same as loyalty, and proximity isn't the same as contribution. The mature move is simple. You don't punish them. You don't beg them. You just keep your standard. You stay polite. You stay calm. And you keep building. Because the work doesn't get easier when people show up. It gets noisier. And if you're not disciplined, you'll mistake the noise for belonging and lose the very edge that created the results in the first place. So if you're in that empty phase right now, no cheering section, no mentor, no team, listen closely. You're not cursed. You're unburdened. You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that stays small enough to be comfortable. You don't need permission to take your life seriously. Build anyway. Not loudly, not to prove a point. Quietly, consistently. With standards high enough that you don't need outside motivation to stay honest. And if you want one sentence to carry into tomorrow, make it this: I don't need support to execute. Comment it if you mean it. Raise your standard. Live by the code.